The Cartoonerific podcast is sponsored by the wonderful World of Animation Gallery, home of rare and wonderful fine animation art. Visit their website at wwagallery.com. And for our Cartoonerific listeners, you will receive a special 10% discount off any purchase if you purchase by March 25th, 2024. Just go to wwagallery.com and enter code CARTOON10 for your 10% discount. Once again, this discount is only valid until midnight, March 25th, 2024. Once again, visit wwagallery.com.
The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host, Brian Mitchell.
That is me. I am Brian Mitchell, and welcome to the Cartoonerific Podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. And I am your host. Well, we just had the 95th Academy Awards ceremony, and winning for Best Animated Motion Picture was Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And it really deserved that award. It is a wonderful, wonderful motion picture. And the stop motion animation is probably the best I've ever seen. Very well done, high quality, good story, very entertaining. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. If you have Netflix, turn it on, watch it tonight. If you don't have Netflix, find somebody that has Netflix and sit in their living room, watch the movie, eating their popcorn. That's what I recommend. Now, this has kind of started up the argument about why a great motion picture, if it's animated or stop motion or hand-drawn or whatever, why it can't compete in the best motion picture category. Why does it have to be taken and put into this best animated feature category? In my opinion, film is film. If you're sitting there in a darkened theater and you're watching a piece of entertainment, it doesn't matter if it's CG or it's hand-drawn or stop motion or drama, horror, whatever. If it's great, it's great. And it should be allowed to compete in that category of best motion picture. There are best feature film categories for international motion picture and for documentary. And I understand that. That makes sense to me. But taking an animated feature film, a really well done animated feature film, and then putting it into its own category really doesn't make sense to me. You know, it's not like best hairdressing or best short subject. It's basically separated from the rest. And I don't know if this was done just because people in Hollywood were afraid that an animated film would beat out a live action film in the Oscar race. So it's something to think about. It's something that maybe Hollywood needs to rethink, and especially the Academy. Hopefully there will be a conversation about that, and maybe things will change. But the only way things like that can change is if there is an actual conversation about it and people are angry about it and voice their opinion. So that's very important. Anyway, getting away from that, don't mean to stir up everybody. Coming up next is a wonderful gentleman. I've known him for a long time. He is he started off in animation at Disney and then got into the story and then became a producer and director. And he's done some cartoon voices. He's done some character voices too. His name is Sam Levine, and he's coming up next. Don't go away.
The Cartoonerific podcast is now available on Spotify, Google, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Alexa, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, Player FM, Apple Podcasts, and many, many others. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. A new Cartoonerific podcast is uploaded every Friday. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Well, this gentleman, I've known, he took a class with me back in the mid-90s, staying there for maybe a couple of weeks. He got wise and he left. He went to Hollywood. He ended up working for Disney in the animation department, working on a couple of films like Tarzan and Hercules and Fantasia 2000, and then moving into the story area on films like Home on the Range and Treasure Planet. And eventually he became a producer and director, doing shows like Pen Zero, Part-Time Hero, and Robot Monster. He recently directed DC League of the Super Pets. He is a wonderful talent, and maybe we'll get him to do a voice or two on the show. Here is Mr. Sam Levine. Hi, Sam. How you doing today?
Hi, Brian. Good to see you. Good to talk with you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.
I'm doing well. It's been a while. It's been like some decades or whatnot.
It's been a long time. You took a class with me back in the 90s, and you very wisely decided to move out to Los Angeles and just kind of get into the industry. And but you were working on stuff here too. So okay, before we get into that, let's talk about the good old childhood. And
sure.
When did you decide that you wanted to get into cartoons, working on animated film?
So I sort of grew up on Long Island. I think I met you on Long Island, so I'm assuming you're from there too. Who would choose to go to Long Island?
apparently a lot of people in the summertime out in the Hamptons.
Okay. But like as a residence. Yeah.
Where are you from on Long Island?
So I was born in Manhattan, but I grew up early in Bayside, Queens, and then I ended up in Nassau County, New Hyde Park.
New Hyde Park. Yeah,
from New Hyde Park. Yeah, the Mineola stop on the train station on the Long Island Railroad.
Yeah, there you go.
Mineola next? Yeah, that one.
Who was born in Mineola? I'm trying to think. It's the Kim Richards. I think Kim and Kyle Richards from. They were born in Mineola.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
I'll buy that. Yeah. No. Let me tell you. It was a fine place to live. Kind of suburbia.
Right.
In the 80s, 70s and 80s, and I got out by the 90s. But no, I grew up. My dad was a projectionist in movie theaters, so I basically grew up in movie theaters. Like I would watch a lot of movies from the booth with my dad.
Right.
I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark like 4 times from the booth with the terrible mono speaker and for some reason that was the best for me. But yeah, I remember in those days, I think I watched Fantasia when it was released in the 80s and, a lot of movies, obviously.
Right.
To be honest, early on, I think I was more influenced by movies than I was animation.
Right.
But for sure, around my, and I was always drawing, since early age, was rewarded for it. People seemed to like my drawings and so encouraged me.
How young were you when you started drawing? Like really?
My first memory was I was in kindergarten in Mrs. Stewart's class, and I remember people being enamored with a drawing I did of King Tut. That's all I remember. I just remember getting that. Like, it's a weird memory because I remember the gratification of like, you did a good drawing, keep doing it. And I just remember that.
Right.
But yeah, I just would always draw. And probably in my preteen years, I got really interested in comic books. Although, and my friends and I, 2 of my best friends, we sit around drawing all the time. Even though I love comics, I don't think I ever saw myself as a comic book artist. And I never really found that type of drawing, even though I love reading them and looking at them and drawing my own things.
Right.
And then I think around age 16, I saw The Little Mermaid, and that kind of blew me away. But slightly before that, I was really interested in Looney Tunes cartoons, and I used to watch Popeye all the time. But before I saw Little Mermaid, I remember some snippet on TV where they talked about, well, it was just one little clip. I think the voice of Sebastian, Samuel Wright, was talking about how the animator got my expressions into this little drawing. And for the first time, I saw a rough pencil test, and it kind of blew me away. I didn't quite know what I was looking at. It was very short, but I was like, oh, it was expressive. It was entertainment. It was a big funny face.
Right.
And I saw the actor and I said, yeah, and I had no idea that that's how animation was done. It was like lifting the veneer of, it looks so effortless when you see a Disney movie, but this was showing the hard work, and it was beautiful to see the rough drawings. And so I got hooked, and I got The Illusion of Life shortly after that. And like Jungle Book came out in movie theaters, and 101 Dalmatians, and I just sort of, absorbed it all.
Right.
I think also Tiny Toons was out on TV, and some reason later Animaniacs, but Tiny Toons somehow got me interested because it was like some kind of new version of these classic Warner Brothers characters. And there's a lot going on in animation in that era.
Yeah, there was. No, Disney was very active, and Spielberg was starting up his own studio, and it seemed like everybody was into it. Not because of the love of it, just because it was the hot thing at the time.
Yeah, there was that Bluth movies that came in and challenged Disney, and then Disney really got their renaissance. But yeah, I think I was really hooked. By the time I watched Little Mermaid, I think I was, to be honest, hooked by the notion of features and the depth of it. Because on the surface, it seemed like a teenage girl or a little girl thing. Like, why would I want to watch that? But when you watch the movie, you realize, there's so much going on there.
Sure. And
it's like all this stuff yearning to get out from all those story artists and animators at the time.
Right.
And the music was a big part of it. Yeah. So that was my childhood. And then I ended up going to NYU, and second year transferred into the film school.
Right. What were you majoring in before that?
Yeah, I think I was trying to convince my dad I wanted to go to Cal Arts, but he was paying part of the way.
Right.
He was sort of like, you should get a real education because that's a tough career. So get a liberal arts. So I was actually studying to be kind of an art teacher. I was it was called CNAP, the School of Education, Health, Nursing, and Arts Professions.
Oh, there
you CNAP. Go. And anyway, both of my roommates were in the film school, and I saw them with the film equipment. And then I walked around like the 8th floor of the NYU building, and I saw all this animation art with the peg holes, all the stuff I only read about in books. And, and at the time I was gawking at it. John Kmaker, who was up there, saw me looking at it and said, you should come, you should transfer to this school or take classes here. And I literally went home, back to my dorm, and I prepared a portfolio to transfer. And then next 3 years I was at the film school, the animation division.
Wow.
Funny story. Just I have to mention it.
Sure.
My one of my roommates was named Brad Kane, who was sort of a guy who had some experience in Broadway shows, and he had auditioned for a movie that had not been announced yet. It was called Aladdin, and he got the part of the singing voice of Aladdin.
Wow.
So in sort of 90s fashion, in a pre-cell phone era, I came back to my dorm room, and there was a message on our big answering machine, and it said, dude, come to BMG Studios and you can watch the recording. And I ran out, hopped in a cab, and I went to BMG Studios. And I think I ran into Julie Kavner, and she was on a payphone saying, I'm here to record The Simpsons. Like I ran into her, and then I was so excited. That was brand new at the time. And then I went up to the floor above, and I got to witness the recording of the whole One Jump Ahead song and A Whole New World with Brad and Lea Salonga with a 65-piece orchestra. I got to see that and just experience that. And I just saw Ron Clements recently, and I told him I was there. I was this little weird nerdy kid in the background while you guys were recording that. So that definitely filled me up with a lot of excitement at the time.
So Menken was probably there too, I would imagine.
He was, and Tim Rice was there, who wrote the lyrics. And I remember I was there, and I remember he did a thing where he was walking around with lyrics he was writing on the spot because they were rewriting the lyrics of the reprise of the song, of Aladdin's song, the Riff Raff Street Rat, that one. And then he handed out to everybody the new lyrics, including me. He said, here you go. I was like, oh, thank you. And I still have it. But it was just funny. It was sort of like he was reworking the lyrics.
very neat.
on the spot. So it was fun energy. And
So you were being
those
primed. You were being primed. You didn't even know it.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, what are the chances that someone who is like so nerdy and excited about, animation and Disney, and then suddenly, to have that as a random roommate to Brad. And later I cast Brad in recently my TV series at Disney XD, Pen Zero. I cast him as a role where he got to sing and act. So that was fun.
Wow, it's pretty neat. You were co-creator of that, and producer and director, and
I kind of was a sort of showrunner of that for 2 seasons. But I co-created it with Jared Bush.
Oh, pretty cool.
But also at NYU there was something really great that they came there with a work in progress print of Beauty and the Beast, where they showed a lot of it was pencil tests, and I remember that too. And I was seeing. Continue the story. I saw, Glenn Keane's rough Beast animation,
Sure.
On like 4s and 8s. It was, clearly just very rough. And I was like, oh yeah, that was, again, it all these things were clinching it, and I wanted to get to Disney. So
yeah.
I should say one more thing. Like, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from John K-Maker, who is running the department and my teacher in a lot of classes.
Sure.
And he knew I wanted to get there. He said, if you want to get to Disney, you should apply early. You should apply and get rejected. And then you should take their notes on your portfolio and then apply again and get rejected. And he said, persistence pays off. It was his advice to me. And
right.
I literally did that on the 3rd try. I did get in.
Yeah.
So it was good advice.
Obviously you met the mark there. So there you go.
Yeah, for sure. I look back at the portfolio and it's definitely weak, but I think they saw that I was listening and I was revising my drawings and doing the gestures and,
right.
I mean, it worked out. Yeah. I was in cleanup for a few years.
Before we jump over to Disney. So, you were going to NYU, and then, you're doing all this stuff. You're actually seeing some of the process, the pre-pro or the music process.
Yeah.
So what was the first job that you got? You didn't go right to California. You went to...
Yeah, it's weird. I sort of, the summer after between my last 2 years, I got hired. I'm trying to think which was first. I think the first thing was I worked on a place called Stretch Films, which is John Dilworth, who did the Courage the Cowardly Dog show. But I got to work with him. I in-betweened on the short that came before the series. I think it was ordered by Cartoon Network as What a Cartoon, but it was actually nominated for an Oscar. But I in-betweened on that. And I think around the same time, I also got a job for 4 months working at MTV doing character layout on a show called The Head. Eric Fogel had a show called The Head about an alien that burst out of this guy's head. It was a crazy show.
Right.
And I don't know, I barely understood linear perspective, and I was doing layout. I was like, okay, like, if you guys want to trust me to do that. Literally, like, I was doing drawings that I couldn't defend in court. Like, I was like, I'm like, photocopying, but it worked. And if you see the show, it sort of has like a crude kind of fun style. But I did that. And then I also did about a week at JJ Settlemyre doing the very first installment of the Ambiguously Gay Duo, which was not, if you ever seen that, the Robert Smigel thing.
Yes.
But it actually wasn't for SNL. It was for the ill-fated Dana Carvey show.
Great show. Yeah.
And I remember we were like gathered around the TV to watch that air. And that was fun. And that was so funny because I think, I think that was my first job.
Right.
Because I was so nervous because I showed up there and they said, here, do in-betweens. And they said, do it on celluloid with a rapidograph, with ink. And I was so like, usually you do rough drawings, you construct and then put the black line over the blue. They're like, do in-betweens on cell, directly onto cell. And I was like, I'm so scared. And they said, we want it to look bad. We want it to look shitty. I was like, right. But can I say that? Are you going to beat me? Sorry.
I'll leave it in. I think everybody's heard that word.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty basic word.
It is.
But Yeah, it was nerve-wracking. It was a whole week, and I would go to White Plains from Manhattan
Right.
every day, and I was putting a line between a line, and I was trying to construct these kind of filmation-looking faces.
Yeah.
It was very stressful, even though they wanted to look bad. As a young artist, you feel like you're being judged, and but it worked out okay.
Well, you want it to look as good as it can possibly look. And
yeah,
if anybody's ever drawn on a cell out there, it's like the thing just glides off the plastic,
Yeah,
so
it
you
was
really
like
got to have control.
Yeah, it really psyched me out. I remember like, so to put the time on it, I think they were playing the first Green Day album they kept on repeat on CD that was playing, and I was like hearing that, and I was like nervous. So when I hear that record, I feel nervous. I feel like it takes me back to the days when I had to, in between on celluloid.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
What was that? Pavlov's dog?
Yeah, I salivate. No. But yes, it has. It's weird.
So it's the association that just drives you nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely had a response for a while.
If anybody, I'm just referring to the audience here because I'm sure that we're going to have like 5 people listening to this at least.
Stop bragging.
The ambiguously gay duo, the voices for that were Steve Carell, Colbert, and who else? Smigel. Did Smigel do
I'm sure Smigel was the big brain villain guy, like I will destroy you, Ace and Gary. Like,
oh no, I think that was Steve Carell doing that voice.
Okay, so
yeah,
so Ace and Gary, they were both. That was Steve and Steve, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know more than I do. You're a fanboy.
Yeah, I can be. It's embarrassing. So it's embarrassing. All right.
I have like encyclopedic knowledge of all kinds of things that I'm vaguely embarrassed of.
Yeah, when I used to work at Warner Brothers, people would come down and they would say, do you know the name of this cartoon? And I'd just like, tell them the name. They just describe it, and I'd say, oh, it's this. And it's over 1,000 cartoons, so yeah, it's embarrassing, I guess.
I mean, it's kind of how you build your point of view, latching onto things. I think it's part of. Obsessiveness is part of the creative,
I think you're right.
Process. I think so.
I think you're right.
My famous story is I got rejected to work. I wasn't good enough to work on the Beavis and Butthead movie, but I got hired to work on Hercules at Disney. I literally did like a training. I think they paid us to do a training program, to work on the Beavis and Butthead movie because it was going to be bigger and different than the TV show.
Right.
And it was a great movie. I remember I went to that premiere when I first got to LA. That was a very funny movie, very good use of the feature format. Sure. At the time, it was very funny. Of course, it was very, crude and simple. But,
it was. It was fun.
I think it
was fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
They were very funny in that. I mean, I think they're back on the air now, but they were very funny in the feature format. Something about them in the movie theater, them just saying their stuff was just funny off of TV. I think that was really working.
Sure. And I think when you got the audience out there and they're reacting to it, then it kind of feeds into it. I remember seeing, I'll just say this. I remember seeing Caddyshack in the movie theater, and it was not funny to me at all. The dynamic changed when there was an audience there. Because I had seen it again, and it was like all of a sudden it was actually funny to me. But when I saw it, it was just like a lot of dry humor,
It's also like of the time, right? At the time, that was probably a big deal.
Yeah.
Funnier at the time.
That's when people found Chevy Chase to be hilarious. So, okay. I don't mean to offend anybody who likes Chevy Chase. I like Chevy Chase. So
Chevy, if you're listening, we're fans. Fletch was awesome.
Fletch was awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
I'm sure Chevy's checking this out.
I'm sure, or somebody will clue him in.
What's up, Chev?
Yeah. So what happened after the New York gigs? How'd you get into Disney? You applied 3 times. It was the third time was the charm.
Yeah, third time was the charm, and I it was kind of funny because the training program was in Florida or Florida, if you're not from New York. Florida. I say Florida because I was raised that way. But Florida, and so, but I came out, and because I just decided I'm going to go to LA. I had some money from when I got hit by a car.
You got hit by a car? What happened?
I did in college. Oh yeah, this is a whole story. Yeah, it actually took me 5 years to graduate because I took a semester off to get hit by a car. I just wanted to get hit by a car, and I regret it, but I just decided, it's an experience I want to have. No, I was crossing the street near Penn Station at 35th Street, and I got hit by a car. It broke my tibia and fibula.
Oh God!
Shattered my leg, and I had surgeries.
Oh man!
But I mean, mostly I was just walking around on crutches. But anyway, I had a little settlement from that, very little, because the guy didn't have insurance. Okay. I figured I'd go to LA, and I didn't hear back from Disney. I wasn't going to get in, so I'll just go get a place in LA. And of course, then I find out that I got the internship, and I was immediately like crestfallen, like, I already put money down on this place. And then I found out for the first time they're going to do a training program in LA, and it's for Hercules. So I sort of lucked out. The universe kind of said, "You're good. Go live in Color City."
The universe can be wonderful.
Yeah,
it can really be. Yeah, sometimes.
I mean, I do think there was something there. Mm-hmm. Because I took the risk, and I said I'm gonna go, move out there anyway, and then I was in the training program, I think I want to say 3 months, and then we went right on to the movie.
Right. And, so they were basically giving you production, like drawings. So giving you like drawings from some of the movie, or maybe that movie, to see how
in training, we did a little bit like, they were like, I remember they're like, here's like a drawing of Roger from 101 Dalmatians, and just, they showed us the techniques and how to roll and how to flip. And, and then they also gave us drawings from Hercules. And that was a hard movie to work in cleanup, because the line, if you remember, it was very like a lot of thick and thin, like a calligraphic, they looked at, Gerald Scarfe was the designer who they looked to. Right. And it's almost like Hirschfeld. They're really thick. And so like, I remember this giant Hades drawing, a full face, like a 16 field. And it was just like, it took a day for a drawing. And we were all like panicking, like, oh, it took me a day to do that. It took me a day and a half to do that. Yeah. And, we were like, we're never going to be able, everyone was panicking. But the truth is, once we got on, you just, it's funny. It becomes second nature, and you almost, especially in cleanup, it's almost abstract. You start to like see the form turning and moving in 3D space on the page. And you're actually not thinking, it's completely like automatic. And to be honest, people in cleanup listen to a lot of audiobooks. Like I actually listened to Robinson Crusoe, which is the most boring thing ever created. Right. And I listened to the whole thing on, I'm sorry, that's not a great book. Well, I never would read it, but listening to it, I could get through it. But because you could kind of check your brain out. And I'm not saying you could check your creativity out, because you really are solving visual problems, and the drawings are challenging. But once you get on a roll, it's almost like it's automatic, and it comes from, I guess, the right side of your brain. Your left brain is usually not part of it. No. But yeah, I did clean up for 2 years. And yeah, on Hercules, it was challenging because it was a very thick line. But then on Fantasia 2000, I worked on the Brizzi brothers, Paul and Gaetan Brizzi, did this Firebird suite. And that was challenging too, because the sprite, the character they were using Prismacolor pencils, and they wanted to get a rough textured line, which was kind of crazy, because I think halfway through they switched it and they said, let's just do it regular, because I think there was like an elusive thing they were trying to figure out, like, how can you get like a textured feeling beyond just a pencil? Right. The truth is, whatever the pencil is, it's going to have texture or it won't. Right. But anyway, it was challenging because it was also almost like effects. Like a half of that character was this flowing cape or tendrils of leaves and magical sparkles or whatever, which was fun, but it was definitely not traditional character cleanup.
Right. So did you jump from there into story? Were you given an opportunity, or what happened there?
So my path to story is interesting. So when I was in college, I remember I took a storyboard class with, John Kmaker, and I really enjoyed it, right? I really enjoyed putting the drawings up. And in my head, I was like, it doesn't matter how beautiful they are. It doesn't matter. They can be crude. But the idea of putting drawings in sequence and showing that, to me, the acting is what's most exciting about it.
Sure.
And the cut shot to shot. So I always loved that, but I always had an interest in it. I don't think I saw myself going in that direction. But I was doing rough in-betweens. I was on the path to be an animator, and I started doing rough in-betweens on the early version of Emperor's New Groove, which at the time was called Kingdom of the Sun. And then that movie went on pause because it had story problems, and then they rebirthed it as a different movie.
With different directors.
With Mark Dindal.
Right.
But during that time, they had a really great thing at Disney, and they still probably do, called the Caricature Show. So every April 1st, April Fool's Day, they would have a caricature show, and people would submit drawings. And I really loved that. I love doing caricatures, and I think I have a knack for likenesses, and I just enjoy the freedom of, and I did a ton of them.
Right.
And John Musker also was like the king of that. John Musker is probably the greatest caricaturist alive. I mean, if you've ever seen his stuff, it's crazy. He does, like, he editorializes, and he spends, hours and hours on them, but or weeks, days and weeks.
Right.
But anyway, I put up a lot of stuff, and at one point he noticed some of them and liked my work, and I sort of, at the same time, they were doing this movie called Sweating Bullets, and they were doing this movie called Treasure Planet on the third floor. I was down like in the basement, or the basement at the time. But I remember going up after work, or in between, working on a scene, in betweening. I remember going up and walking around the third floor and seeing these amazing drawings. Harold Sieperman was, he passed away. He was doing these amazing drawings of Long John Silver and all these things.
Right.
These ink drawings with watercolor. And then, Mike Gabriel and Mike Giammo were doing these amazing, kind of Mary Blair-esque ghost cowboys and animals. And I remember just being inspired. And so I just started using the techniques that I did on the caricatures, started doing a lot of drawings of alien pirates and cowboys and, animals. And I bundled them up together, and I just sort of gave a thick bundle of drawings to Ron and John. I just left it with their assistant. I don't know. And then I did the same with Mike and Mike. Mike and Mike were like, I think Mike Giammo was very kind and had some ideas and notes. But with Ron and John, I think I went away on vacation and came back, and I had a message from their assistant, Angela, who said, Ron and John saw your drawings and they really liked them, and they want to meet with you. And I met with them, and they said they wanted me to do 10 hours a week overtime while I was in betweening to do alien pirate designs. And so I started doing that. And then I also got the script. So I was reading the script, which was exciting for me, Yeah. You don't really see the script, that early. And I found a scene that I really loved. And I don't know what possessed me, because I didn't really think it through. But I just decided I'm going to storyboard. Oh, I think I know what happened. Ron and John said that they would love to have me on full time, but they couldn't. They have too many people already. But there's room in story. I think at the time there were a lot of shows going on. Yeah. At the same time, so there was a lack of story talent because there are too many shows and not enough people. So they said there may be an opening in story. So of course that set a light bulb off my head, and I literally boarded the equivalent of 8 full-size storyboards. And when I had the whole scene done, it was the scene when Jim Hawkins meets the pirate crew. And I just scheduled a meeting, and I pitched my version of their movie, of this scene, to them. And when it was done, Ron said, "It seems like you should be doing story." And they hired me as a story trainee for 3 months. And then after 3 months, I was on the movie as a story artist. Wow. Looking back, those drawings were really, I would not like those drawings today. Probably then I didn't like them. But I think they showed, and I think I pitched with gusto. I did the voices,
Right.
the British accents. I did all the voices, and I think I just love that stuff. I'm kind of a ham actor. I love doing that stuff. And I think they just saw that I had this,
the ability,
this interest, the ability, but also like a lot of it has to do with just, I think, taking the risk, taking the chance, and putting yourself out there. And I think looking back, I think when you're young, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And I didn't know if I was stepping on any toes or if I was going out of my lane. I just sort of said, I got a script. I'm going to storyboard. Story.
I think that's very important to take, you basically took the initiative. And, when you get into a place, there are people that just settle in. They just get really good at one thing and it's just like tunnel vision. And, I think because you have the enthusiasm, you're trying this, you're doing some designs, you're doing some story work, you're doing this, and because you want to do it, you're excited. And I think that's where it really gets you places in a studio, because they start to discover your talents. And even though, I know you're saying that the drawings, they're much better today. Of course they're going to be better today. But my point is that there had to be something there that you're getting the story ideas over, that's the important thing for story, at least for features, because in TV they want you to draw it on model.
I think it's changed a bit, but sort of that
right.
It's changed a bit even in features where they want things to be more animated and more not on model, but more the draftsmanship, the animation comes into it. Right. But there definitely was like if it communicates, it was pre-digital, right? I was drawing on sketches and then they shot them on the overhead and so that things weren't having to line up perfectly. Mm-hmm. Now when you board, in Photoshop or whatever, Toon Boom, like you can move a pupil, a micron, like a micrometer, and it changes the story and it's funny. Right. And they want that. They want you to animate. And, I'm even directing. I want to see that. Like, right. And it's sort of one of those Pandora's box thing where it's like, well, remember when storyboards were just supposed to give you a sense of what the story was? You're not animating it yet. Right. But people want to see that. At the time, I was on the track to be an animator. I had taken the rough in-between test, which was, a lot of people in cleanup wanted to be an animator and they wanted to. And rough in betweens was fun. I did that for about 6 months on Tarzan. Yeah, where you're doing more animation, you're figuring more things out, but also you're looser. You don't have to spend right so much time on the line quality. But I started a lot of animation tests. I'd say I started like 4 or 5, and I wasn't getting traction with them. Not with the animators I would show; they were always nice and had good suggestions. But myself, I wasn't feeling it. Right. I think when it came, I think that's why I started doing characters. Why I started doing the visual development, and ultimately why I gravitated towards doing the storyboards was because it just was more natural for me. Animation and storyboards, you work all the time. You're working hard on both. But like you were saying, I think you were saying before. It's like when you do storyboards, you're doing a bigger chunks of the creativity. You're taking on a sequence, you're taking on the cinematography, you're taking on the editing, you're taking on the performance. Mm-hmm. Animation, you have to love the drawing and the mechanics of moving it around, at least from a 2D standpoint. Right. And 3D too. You need to love that the nuance of the moment. Of a matter of 6 seconds, whereas story, it's a different muscle. So I think story was more natural for me. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of guy. I'm not like the one thing. I like to pitch. I like to do voice. I like to I've written songs for my shows. I like to kind of like be more of a generalist, I guess. And I think that's what story afforded me.
Well, I think you're really kind of crafting the way that film is going to be. You can always find, I just interviewed Sandro Clouseau.
Oh, I love Sandro.
Yeah.
I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's phenomenal. And, I've had other great animators on here. And those guys really get a kick out of just doing that one scene, or maybe doing a couple of scenes together, and figuring out some way of making it fun. And it's it's great. It's great to do that. But when you're in control of that storyboard, you are dictating the flow. You're dictating everything to the animators. You're influencing all that stuff. The animators are just plussing it. They're just adding some stuff to it. And I don't mean to trivialize what they do, because what they do is important. But you're more in control of like that either the whole film or a part of that film. And
you're dealing with more puzzle pieces. You have like 20 puzzle pieces instead of one puzzle piece you're trying to get into into one connection. Which, you say Sandra. Sandra is so one of the few out there that like kind of in a Milk Kahl way really turns the forms and has that kind of perfectly 2D and 3D feel. That's pretty amazing. His stuff.
Yeah, it's magic.
He was on Firebird on Fantasia that's when I met him. He was animating on that Fantasia sequence.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
Yeah, back in '98. It was back in '98. Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
I've had on a couple of different people that, we've been talking about this. Animators and people working in animation tend to do voices. And and you've done a few. We've heard a few here.
Yeah.
But one that totally floored me, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, is Home on the Range.
Oh,
when I found out you did some voices there, but we'll get into that in a minute.
It's so fun when you get up there and you pitch, and you try to sell it. You're trying to, that's you do the voices. You try to, back in the day, you'd kind of point with the stick and you'd move around and you try to approximate the editing in the way you pitch it, and now you can do it with the clicking through.
Sure.
And I love the pitch. I feel like that's like as much as I love drawing. Sometimes I hate drawing. Like drawing and figuring out the boards can be like, the agony and the ecstasy. It can be very challenging.
Right.
But even if you just decided to have a few panels be ugly chicken scratch, the joy of just pitching through and just convincing yourself and the audience at the same moment of the quality of entertainment is fun. And then, so I remember doing that and enjoying that. And someone had told me at one point, I think this guy named David Oldfield had told me this concept of intimate detachment, which I thought was a good term, which is like, you have to like pitch it like it's the greatest story ever told. And the minute you finish, you have to be open to the fact that it might be the worst piece of shit in history. Like you have to be intimate with it and then immediately detach.
Divorce
so that you don't attach your ego to it, because then when it gets bruised, you don't get bruised. And I think you develop that thick skin, but it's also like, that's the process, right? You're in the moment. You think it's the movie, but of course the movie is where this step in the stairs or the rung in the ladder gets you to. It may not be this way. So I learned that a lot in these sessions with Ron and John on that movie, and just seeing the movie develop and all these different scenes. So it was a lot of fun. And after that movie, I remember one fun thing that I got to do was when you off of a movie, either you go right on to another one, or sometimes you're just kind of, in a little bit of a holding pen for a while.
Right.
And I remember the great Don Hahn was walking around then, and he was at the time, it was around the year 1999, I think. He was working on a possibly new Fantasia, and it was maybe going to be different kinds of music, and he kind of came into my cubicle and said, think about an old ski resort, a bunch of Arctic animals encounter a ski resort and use it and kind of start playing around with the equipment, the skis, the bobsleds, and here's the Emperor's Waltz, I think it's Tchaikovsky, the da 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 dun 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 dun. So it's like a classic piece of music.
Right.
And he said, go. And I said, okay. And I just went. And I literally I had this piece of music, and I love music. And I literally boarded the whole thing. And I did it I roughed it, but then I used pastels and I had like a father and son a polar bear, teaching the son how to ski. I had these snowboarding penguins. I had, that was before that movie with the surfing penguins, well before that.
Right.
But I had these snow monkeys that were like doing coordinated hot tub relaxing, like they were like synchronized swimmers, but they were like doing it as dance.
Right.
And I had a lot of crazy stuff, but I did this whole thing, and it was, in my mind, probably one of the most creatively satisfying things I ever did, because it was like 4 weeks, whatever I wanted to do,
right,
design it, board it, pitch it. And one of the greatest things ever was they brought Roy E. Disney in, and I got to pitch it to him twice. I pitched it once verbally, and then I took him through, and he was in the chair rolling with me every moment. I pitched him through the music.
Right.
And he really enjoyed it. He said after, he's like, my Uncle Walt loved animals. It was just like, I felt like I was kind of talking to Disney in that moment. It was like one of those sweet moments that
one of those surreal moments.
Yeah. It was just really nice. And, it didn't, I think after that, I went on to a different project, and someone else took it over and made some changes. And I saw them, and I was like, that's not what I would do. And then the whole project didn't end up happening.
Right.
But, it didn't matter. It was one of those moments that was like, pretty great and pretty fun. A lot of work, but it was sort of like all things I wanted to do,
Were they able to make an animatic out of it with the music, or? Yeah,
they did. But yeah. No, it was good.
Right.
Of course, at that point, I was just a storyboard artist, and I hadn't directed anything. But in my head, I was editing it, and I think when I saw it, it wasn't quite what I had in mind. So.
Right.
And of course, I think at that point, someone was, it wasn't Don, it was someone else who was attached to the producer, and someone else was giving notes. It's like at a certain point, like, who's giving notes? Like, who's driving it? But ultimately, they didn't want to make a third one.
Right.
So it is what it is. But those moments are great. Like that was definitely a highlight for me.
Sure.
That's why I think you have to kind of like have the fun you have with it, and like understand that you're not in control. It's actually it's a good message for life. I think the illusion that we're ever in control of anything,
right,
is only ever an illusion. It's a miracle anything gets made. Like it's a miracle. So when things happen, we should just be grateful that you can get things done. But
they're paying you, for that. Yeah. To have fun. Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not saying having gripes isn't justified. I certainly have had my share of gripes over the years. Yeah, well, I think a lot of people do.
And I actually spent time working on, I'd say at least four projects that never got released, or at least in the way they were intended originally. And 3 of which that were completely never came out.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time on them. So I worked on projects that didn't end up coming out. But forged some good friendships, and certainly learned a lot.
Right.
You learn a lot when you see a concept that seems like it. When there's a concept that is just not landing, is not working for anybody, and then ultimately dies. And no matter how hard you work, no matter how much the creativity that's being applied to it is good, it never
solidifies
to fruition.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, someone who's a wise artist, he just made that movie, The Sea Beast. Chris Williams once told me around that time that he thought, good projects absorb ideas, or a good movie absorbs good ideas, and projects that are not great, they deflect. If you have a great idea, it just bounces off. And
right.
So, it's a good sign if you have a project that accepts, it's kind of, fluid, and it accepts ideas.
Right.
It's a good sign that it gets better.
Right.
It has some give to it. It's a project. And a lot of times projects, you throw a good idea and the answer is, no, it doesn't fit because of this, this, and this. Or that won't work because we already tried that. Or that doesn't work because, and then you're like, well, maybe that's not worth, ever coming out. So sometimes that happens, but I'm sort of digressing. But at that time, I definitely had some good relationships and, learned a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, I worked a lot. In that time, I actually sort of became a story supervisor on a project. I had a story and I was co-writing a script.
Mm-hmm.
And that one project never came to fruition. And then another project that I was pitching and developing. And then, I can't really get into it too much, but I learned a lot in the process. And I guess I'm what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, as they say.
Yeah, there you go.
But
that's a good positive way of putting it.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like you said, you're there to work and you do your best. And I ended up leaving Disney at around 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I think I sort of had an opinion at the time where I really wanted to work at Disney, and it was about the place. I think a wiser approach, and I think it's something that I've learned. When I work, it's about people and it's about projects.
Right.
You want to be in a creatively habitable environment that nurtures your creativity, but you don't have to be at this studio or that. You really just need a really good project, and most importantly, you need people that you want to work with, because
right.
You can do any. You need the support of a studio. You need the nurturing to actually get it done. But the project is exciting and it's something new and fresh. And if the people you're working with are of like mind,
mm-hmm.
and you can work together. So that's been my approach.
We should equate that to like Larry David on Saturday Night Live, who basically, I think he was there for a year, or maybe or maybe a little bit longer. I don't know, but
cast member.
I don't know if he was. I know he was writing. He was probably a cast member as well, but everything he wrote was rejected.
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean that he's horrible. It just means he's not fitting into what they think a writer should be doing for that show. So it's almost like it's kind of the same thing. You're working at Disney, you're doing something, maybe doing something that's not in line with what they think is good, but that doesn't mean that's not valid. It just means that you're not clicking with the people that are there. And so sometimes...
who's to say? It's a very, development is always challenging. You're just working towards making it stronger. But, the question of who you're working for and who's in charge and who has the power, those things can change day by day.
Oh, absolutely.
They can change week by week.
Yeah.
And you can only ever do the best that you think you can do every day. Like you show up and let me try to make it this, let me try to make it that. Right. I mean, I think you get into trouble when you are just trying to chase someone else's point of view, or you're trying to second guess yourself and saying, what will they like? That goes for audiences too. You're a huge student of Chuck Jones.
Yes.
The brilliance of Termite Terrace is they never made movies. They never made shorts for anybody but themselves.
Yep.
And they just trusted the audience would come with them, because if they're laughing, of course the audience is going to laugh too.
Right. I mean, you had over at Termite Terrace, which I think it went beyond Termite Terrace. That was like in the early days, but they moved into a more modern building on the Warner Bros. Lot in Burbank. And
the Termite Free Terrace.
Yes. But basically the people that came in, they would be, there was a guy, Tom Ray, he worked on Tom and Jerry shorts. He was an assistant. He came into, I don't know if it was Friz Freeling's unit or Bob McKimson, but he ended up moving into Chuck Jones' unit because he was a good artist, and they were all good artists, but he kind of fit in, and so he worked there, until they closed down. And then he went with Chuck Jones when they started doing the Tom and Jerry's and the Grinch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, that happens, you just happen to like working with certain people, and you're in tune with them. So, kind of the same thing here.
Man, those Tom and Jerry's, not the Chuck Jones, those are fun in their own way, of course, but those original Hanna-Barbera, those Tom and Jerry's are so good.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I noticed my kids discover them a few different times growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and they just they hold the attention. They're so good. It's just, it's just something so pure about that.
They're pure and they're
still
creative.
funny.
Yeah, they're creative. They're fun.
And you're with it. You're totally like, the point of view is so clear. Tom is never going to win. You want to see how he's going to lose. And it's just so rewarding.
Sure.
And I remember my kids were saying at one point on TV, they were getting the DVR and they're like, oh, look, very young, like, oh, Jake, a new one came out. And they, as far as they were concerned, they were brand new.
Yeah.
They, and they're still making them. And yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I just marvel at things.
Yeah. Well, they
so pure and so good. You can learn from them.
It's nice when something from 1944 can hold up in 2023. And that just shows how much quality was put in them and how much imagination. Because I guess when they first came out with those Tom and Jerry's, people in the studio were going, a cat and mouse? What's so original about that? And
cat and mouse, see?
It's
and
a
the
cat.
cat's always chasing the mouse. He can eat him. See, it's going to be big. It's going to be huge. What are you telling me? People can stand in line for a cat and a mouse? They can see that in their own house.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly. But that's what they were saying at the studio. It's like, what's the big deal? Everybody's done it. Yeah.
Those are great. It's like, cut the Jeffrey Katzenberg saying, cut the Part of Your World song.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody, whatever. You only can do the best you can at the moment, but
that's right.
That's right.
But those things sing.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at Cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Hey, well, that was a cool interview with Mr. Sam Levine. Sam's going to be back next week for part 2 of that interview. So please stay tuned for that. I received an email this week from a fan out in the Midwest, and he asked me, he said, if you had the ability to interview anybody alive or had passed on throughout the history of the animation profession, who would that be? And, I had to give it some thought, but, some people might say Walt Disney or Walter Lantz or, and I thought maybe Tex Avery. And the reason why I was thinking Tex Avery was because Tex had worked at the Walter Lantz studio. He went to the Warner Brothers studio and he did his thing there and then went to MGM, then did commercials in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then ended up working for the Hanna-Barbera studio. So that would be the guy that I'd want to interview. Well, that's my choice anyway. Anyway, if you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe or tell a friend. Okay? Just spread the word around about the Cartoonerific podcast. So anyway, it's been fun. I want everybody to have a great day. I want you to have an excellent week. And once again, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.